Ahoy hoy! Welcome back to my channel. Today, since it's still in October and it's still spooky season, we're going to discuss the alleged hauntings of the Octagon house. And if you don't know what the Octagon house was, it was the temporary residence for the Madisons after the White House was destroyed by fire in 1814. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first read you guys about the history of the house and then go into the alleged hauntings because they have a really awesome claim. Okay, so here's the history. And I'll give you guys the links to the articles in the description box so you guys can read it for yourselves. On August 24th, 1814, an invading British army set fire to the White House, Capitol, and other public Washington, D.C. buildings in retaliation for an American attack on the Canadian capital, York, in 1813. President James and Dolly Madison fled the attack, seeking safety in Leesburg, Virginia, and later Brooksville, Maryland. Upon their return to Washington a few weeks later, with the White House destroyed, the first family needed another place to stay. The Madisons found the Octagon house, likely spared from the British flames because of the tricolor flag its resident, French Minister Louis, I'm probably going to fuck up this name, Seurer flew. This unique federal-style home was completed in 1800. Even though Wikipedia says 1799, but since I'm reading from an article by the National Park Service, I'm going to go with the National Park Service. And no, they're not sponsoring this video. As I said, it was completed in 1800 and was one of the grandest townhouses in the nation at the time. Although the Madisons were offered use of several homes, the Octagon house was nearby and met their needs, becoming the temporary White House when they moved in on September 8, 1814. Presidential life quickly resumed a normal pace, although wartime anxieties cast a pall over social gatherings. The Madisons maintained their living quarters on the second floor in the southeast suite, which consisted of a small, I'm probably going to fuck up this word, vestibule. It's spelled Vestibule. A large bathroom with a fireplace and a smaller dressing room. The president used the adjoining circular tower room as a study and at least some of the time as a meeting place with his cabinet. This is where the Treaty of Ghent, it's spelled Ghent, was signed on February 17, 1815, before being sent to Congress for ratification in the War of 1812. This masterpiece of Federalist architecture features curved stone decorative elements imported from England, as well as local construction materials. The Octagon House became the home of the American Institute of Architects in 1889 and has been in their care ever since. And they're also not sponsoring this video. So there's actually more history to the house than this. This is just what the house is known for, at least historic-wise. So the Octagon House is also known as the Colonel John Tylo Third House, and it's located in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood of Washington, D.C. It is only one of 4 houses to serve as the presidential residence in the history of the United States, and one of the only 2, along with the White House, that still stand today. Just quickly reading something. Okay. Colonel John Tylo III, for whom the house was built, was born at Mount Airy, which is located in, Mount Airy is in Richmond, Virginia. Yeah. Or Richmond County, Virginia, I should say. But she later inherited it. And he built the Clinton estate by his father. They're talking about Mount Erie here, or they're talking about the Octagon house? I'm confused. I'm going to skip that part because it has nothing. Anyway, so this guy did try to run for Congress in 1800, but he didn't make it. But he did serve in the Virginia state legislature. He married Anne Ogle, daughter of Benjamin Ogle and granddaughter of Samuel Ogle of Ogle Hall, Annapolis, Maryland, in 1792 at her family's country home, Beller Mansion. This is actually interesting because Beller Mansion is near where I used to live in Bowie. And the mansion was like from 1745. And this was a very prominent family because Samuel Ogle had been the provincial governor of Maryland back then. So it's interesting how this is related and stuff. Anne was only a year younger than her husband. Wasn't that kind of rare back then? Probably not. That was bad of me to say. Taylor was reputed to be the richest Virginia planner of his time and built the house in Washington at the suggestion of George Washington on land purchased from Gustavus W. Scott or Benjamin Stoddert, first Secretary of the Navy. The Octagon was originally constructed to be a winter residence for the Tylo family, but they lived in the house year-round from 1818 to 1855. The Octagon property originally included a number of outbuildings, including a smokehouse, laundry, stables, carriage house, slave quarters, and an ice house, the only surviving outbuilding. The Taylors were involved in shipbuilding, horse breeding, and racing, and owned several iron foundries. They were fairly diverse for a plantation family. The Taylors owned hundreds of slaves and had between 12 and 18 who worked at the Octagon. So that's the history of the house, at least for now. And the Octagon House became a museum back in 1970. And it was restored to its 1817-1818 era in the early 1990s. And it was declared a national landmark in 1960. So now that we've gone over the history of the house and a little bit of details about when it became a museum as well as a landmark, we can go into the fun stuff, which is, well, actually the history stuff is fun for me, but we'll go into the more fun stuff of the video. The alleged haunting of the Octagon. So, the Octagon House is purported to be one of the most haunted homes in D.C. Apparitions and the presence of otherworldly forces have reportedly been seen and felt in many places at the Octagon, including on the spiral staircase, the second floor landing, the third floor landing, the third floor bedroom, and the garden area in the rear. Perhaps I should show these pictures. So, supposedly ghosties have been seen. Let me see. Let me try to erase this. Technical difficulties. I hate technical difficulties. Anyway, I'll show you the pictures eventually. Yeah. And among the eyewitnesses have been members of the public, curators, and other employees hired by the museum. There are many variations of ghost stories featured at the Octagon House. As one of the oldest buildings in the city, it lends itself nicely as a setting for historical, spooky, and macabre tales. The stories recorded here are merely a representation of a few of the reported experiences and legends that have evolved over the past 200 years. That's how long the activity goes back, supposedly, and should not be taken as a historic fact. So, I do want to read first about reported stories that are not true that kind of make because what happens sometimes in paranormal activity, someone attributes a spirit to be somebody because they think they died a certain way when there's no record of it anywhere in the archives and stuff. So I'm going to start with Colonel Tylo's daughters. By far the most intricate and popular of the legends connected with the Octagon is that the deaths of the Tylo's daughters. Variations of the legend are so well developed and circulated that visitors to the house are often thoroughly convinced that they are based on fact. In reality, there is no documentation to support any of them. The legend, which made its first appearance in 1908 article run by the Minneapolis Tribune, has appeared on TV shows and numerous ghost books, and usually follows a storyline similar to this. Two of Colonel Tylo's daughters are said to haunt the Octagon. The first allegedly died before the War of 1812. Colonel Tylo and his daughter quarreled on the second floor landing over the girl's relationship with a British officer stationed in the city. When the daughter turned in anger to go downstairs, she fell down the stairs or over the railing, stories refer, and died. Her specter, that's another way of saying her apparition, is literally seen crumpled at the bottom of the steps or on the stairs near the second floor landing, and sometimes exhibits itself as the light of a candle moving up the staircase. The other death, stories claim, occurred in 1817 or shortly thereafter. Another of Colonel Tylo's daughters eloped with a young man, incurring her father's wrath. Sorry, my tongue is hurting a little bit. When she returned home to reconcile with her father, they argued on the third floor landing. This daughter, too, fell to her death down the stairs or over the railing, and her shade is alleged to haunt the third floor landing and stairs between the second and third floors. Sorry about how I sound. My nose started to get stuffed up. And it doesn't help when my tongue is hurting. There is no historical evidence to support these stories. Nothing about the ghosts of the daughters appeared before 1908, and none of the Tylo daughters died in the Octagon. Of the Tylo's 7 daughters, only 3 died before the age of 30. Of those, 1 died in 1800 at the age of 1 month, and Tylo, and never lived in the Octagon. Rebecca Plater Tylo died in 1815 at the age of 18, but at that time, the Octagon was being rented by President Madison, and the Tylo family was staying at their Mount Airy plantation, Richmond County, Virginia. Sources say that the Tylo family was grief-stricken by the loss through illness of their 18-year-old daughter while at Mount Airy. The next youngest of their surviving daughters to die was Elizabeth Mary Tylo, who died in 1832 at the age of 26. She died in Washington, D.C., but not at the Octagon House. At the time of her death, her father had been dead for 4 years, and she'd been married to her husband, Robert Wormley Carter, too, for some time. The 4 remaining daughters all died over the age of 38. For a complete list, you can go check out the complete list of their deaths and births on John Taylor's third page on Wikipedia, which you would see it in this link from Wikipedia about the hauntings. So that's to get that one away, only because the stories behind the daughters' deaths are not historical facts. So I don't know what people are saying, but whoever it is, it's not Colonel Tylo's daughters. Let's see. I have a kangaroo or something. So I'm going to start off with the other hauntings first before I really get to the really fun one. So there's something about Dolly Madison, who was, of course, the first lady that stayed in the Octagon House because the White House was torched in 1814. There are a number of ghostly legends of the Octagon that deal with its early history as a gathering place for the elite of Washington. Dolly Madison is prominent in these legends because she was well known as a hostess during the first quarter of the 19th century. She's a very popular ghost in Washington, D.C., and is said to haunt several buildings around town. Dolly and James Madison resided in the Octagon House from September 1814 to March 1815. According to the legends, ghostly receptions are held by Dolly Madison, who is supposedly most often seen in the front hall and drawing room, and the smell of lilacs is noticeable whenever her ghost is present. So the other activity is, and this goes back as far as 1888, guys. The Octagon was firmly established as a haunted house by 1888. When it is reported 12 men decided to spend a night in the house in order to expel the ghost or prove the legends wrong. A first-hand account was printed in the local newspaper, and this was subsequently quoted or paraphrased in articles printed in 1892, 1934, 1941, 1950, and 1969. And it goes, in quote, the hours wore quietly on. The party were dispersed from garret to cellar. At the hour of midnight, as I and two others were crossing the threshold of a room on the second floor, 3 feminine streaks rose from the center of the room. Aghast we stood. From all quarters the party rushed. Too brave to desert, yet cowards at heart, we watched the gray light of morning dawn, and each man of us thanked God his night among ghosts was past. After those screams, our band was quite closely knit together. Collectively, we listened through the waning hours of night to the clinking of sabers and tramping of footfalls. Museum Superintendent, I am not going to be able to pronounce that, Alric, spelled A-L-R-I-C, H. Clay, claimed that in the 1960s, spirits would often turn on the lights and open the Octagon doors late at night. In the 1940s, a doctor who had made a house call to the Octagon had a strange encounter on the stairway. Caretaker James Cypress had summoned the physicians for his ailing wife. The doctor was preparing to leave when he mustered up enough courage to ask Cypress if there was a costume party going on that evening. When Cypress told him that there wasn't, the doctor looked perplexed and told him of encountering a man on the stairs just a few minutes before who had been dressed in a military uniform of the early 1800s. A gambler was shot to death in the home's third-floor bedroom in the late 19th century. Has been reportedly seen in the room in which he died. A 1912 newspaper article related to the story of the man who had stayed for a month in the room in the Octagon claimed that he was visited nightly by a spirit of a man who was killed over a card game held in the room. There are numerous reports of occurrences in the Octagon that were supposedly caused by household ghosts. The sound of rustling silk is said to be heard on the main staircase. The hanging lamp in the main hallway allegedly swings by itself. There's a spot at the foot of the main staircase that some people feel they are forced to avoid, and one curator is reported to have found the tiptoeing tracks of human feet in the undisturbed dust of the top floor landing. However, here's the most fun claim. The oldest of Octagon's ghost legends is that of the mysterious ringing of the servants' call bells, just one of the legends linked to the African-American slave who once lived there. When the house held bells to summon servants, the spirits of the dead slaves would announce their presence by ringing these bells loudly. The ghostly bell ringing is believed to have first occurred in the mid-1800s. Virginia Tylo Lewis, a granddaughter of John Tylo III, grew up in the house and recorded this family memory in an unpublished manuscript. She writes, "The bells rang for a long time after my grandfather Tylo's death, and everyone said that the house was haunted. The wires were cut, and still they rang. Our dining room servant would come upstairs to ask if anyone rang the bell, and no one had." An account by Marion Gunnerer, oh God, I can't pronounce that, Gunnerer, wife of Samuel Lawrence Gunnerer Jr., the first American consul in Fuzhou, China, tells the story of General George D. Ramsey, Chief of Ordnance for the United States Army and commander of the Washington Arsenal in Washington, D.C., and his experience with the bells, quote unquote. "I have been told by the daughters of the General G.D. Ramsey that upon one occasion their father was requested by Colonel John Tylo to remain at the Octagon overnight when we was obliged to be absent as a protection to his daughters. While the members of the family were at the evening meal, the bells in the house began to ring violently. General Ramsey immediately arose from the table to investigate, but failed to unravel the mystery. The butler, in a state of great alarm, rushed into the dining room and declared that it was the work of an unseen hand. As they continued to ring, General Ramsey held the rope which controlled the bells, but it is said they were not silenced. By 1874, the bell legend was well established. Mary Clammer Ames wrote about it. Quote unquote, "It is an unauthenticated fact that every night at the same hour all the bells would ring at once. One gentleman dining with Colonel Tylo, when this mystery ringing began, being an unbeliever of mysteries and a very powerful man, jumped up and caught the bell wires in his hand, but only to be lifted bodily from the floor while he was unsuccessful in stopping the ringing. Some declared that it was discovered after a time that rats were the ghosts who rung the bells, others that the cause was never discovered, and that failing the family to secure peace were compelled to take the bells down and hang them in a different fashion. Among other remedies, had been previously tried that of exorcism, but the prayers of the priests who had summoned availed not. The servant bells were no longer in the house, and there are no reports of their continuing to ring today." That would be awesome if they actually brought the bells back into the house to see if they would ring or not. That would be awesome to see if that would happen. But alas. So let me see if I can get these pictures up. So, of the staircases. Now, let me see here. So, this is the formal oval curved stairway. This is supposedly where one of the spirits is sighted at. Looks pretty. And then, oh, by the way, just in case it's not clear in the thumbnail, this is the Octagon house. Let's see. You already saw that. And this is an angled service stairway. And this is another place where people have seen things. So, yeah. Well, that's about it for this video. If you like this video, hit like. If you subscribe, I'll be absolutely delighted. Have you guys ever been to the Octagon house? Have you ever seen anything there? Would you like to go to the Octagon house if you haven't? I haven't been there before, but I would like to go there now. So maybe I might go there next time I'm in the States. So that's it for now. See you guys later. Bye-bye.